Pull up two satellite images, side by side. On the left, the Great Salt Lake in 1985, more than 2,000 square miles, the largest body of water west of the Mississippi. On the right, the same lake today. Half of it is gone. A white ring of exposed lake bed wraps around what's left, and buried in that dry lake bed are toxic metals now blowing toward more than 2 million people. Standing out there, the ground crunches under your boots. The dust smells of minerals and something older and more chemical. It blows straight toward the city. How does one of the fastest growing cities in America end up destroying the resource it can't survive without? This isn't primarily a climate story. It happened because the city next door kept growing and kept drinking. Most people, when they think about the Great Salt Lake at all, think of it as a curiosity, too salty to swim in comfortably. Famous for brine shrimp, a novelty on the way to somewhere else. That framing is wrong. The lake is infrastructure. It doesn't just sit there in the desert. It shapes the climate of the entire Wasatch Front, the narrow corridor where more than 80% of Utah's population lives. Moisture rising off the lake helps feed snowfall into the Wasatch Mountains. That snowpack fills reservoirs. Those reservoirs supply drinking water to the metro area. Take the lake away and the snowpack weakens. Take the snowpack away and the downstream water supply tightens considerably. And all of that depends on water continuing to reach the lake. Then there are the birds. Every year, millions of migratory birds stop at the Great Salt Lake along the Pacific Flyway, one of the major migration routes in the Western Hemisphere. For many of them, this is not a detour, it is a survival stop. Remove the lake, and you remove the waypoint. The birds don't simply reroute somewhere else. Many of them die. And then there are the brine shrimp. The Great Salt Lake is the primary global source of brine shrimp cysts used in aquaculture feed. Fish farms across Asia, Europe, and South America rely on them to feed juvenile fish through the earliest stage of life. Roughly 40% of the world's aquaculture feed supply originates here, in a shrinking desert lake in Utah. That realization stops people cold. Utah, landlocked, high desert, population 3.5 million, is quietly a critical node in the global maritime food economy. If the lake disappears, fish farms on 3 continents feel it. At its historical peak, the Great Salt Lake was the 8th largest saline lake in the world. It covered more territory than Rhode Island and Delaware combined. By any measure, this was a major body of water, and it has been shrinking for a very long time. But the pace changed dramatically at a specific point in time, and the reason is upstream. 6 rivers feed the Great Salt Lake: the Bear, the Weber, the Jordan, the Provo, the Ogden, and the Malad. Historically, those rivers carried snowmelt out of the mountains and into a terminal lake with no outlet. Today, most of that water never arrives. It gets diverted upstream. Agriculture accounts for roughly 71% of all water consumed from the Great Salt Lake watershed, and within that agricultural use, most of the water goes to a single crop, alfalfa. Water-intensive hay, grown primarily to feed cattle and dairy herds. Utah is not an efficient place to grow it. The soil is alkaline, the growing season is short, and the water has to come from rivers fed by mountain snowpack in an already dry region. So why grow alfalfa at scale in the Utah desert? The answer is water law. Like most of the American West, Utah operates under a legal doctrine called prior appropriation. The basic principle is simple: first in time, first in right. The first people to claim water from a river keep priority access to it permanently. In dry years, senior water rights get fulfilled first. Junior rights get cut off. And many of Utah's oldest water rights belong to farms. Mormon settlers arrived in the Salt Lake Valley in 1847 and began diverting water almost immediately. By the 1870s, those claims had been formalized into territorial and eventually state law. Some of the alfalfa fields operating today sit on water rights more than a century old. And here's the strange part: Salt Lake City itself holds newer water rights than many of the farms surrounding it. Legally, Hayfields established in the 19th century can hold stronger claims to river water than the modern city beside them. The legal system was designed to reward whoever arrived first. The city arrived later. Since 1850, the Great Salt Lake has lost roughly 73% of its water volume and around 60% of its surface area. Agriculture and municipal consumption account for the overwhelming majority of that decline. Climate change made the problem worse, but it did not build the mechanism. The mechanism was already there, embedded in the legal structure of the watershed itself. And over the last few decades, that structure gained a powerful accelerant. The city started booming. Salt Lake City keeps expanding. Through 2025, it ranked among the fastest growing cities in the country. The broader Wasatch Front, the urban corridor stretching from Provo to Ogden, now holds nearly 2.5 million people. Utah's tech sector has surged over the last decade. New subdivisions continue pushing across the valley floor. Warehouses, office parks, and data centers spread outward from the city into the desert. And every part of that growth requires water. Every new resident, every new neighborhood, every new cooling system attached to a data center, all of it draws from the same rivers that once flowed, uninterrupted, into the lake. Municipal and industrial consumption now account for roughly 27% of the lake's total water deficit, and that share continues to grow. Then there's the geography itself. The Wasatch Front is not an open plain. It's a corridor, squeezed between the Wasatch Mountains to the east and the Great Salt Lake to the west. There is no geographic escape valve. The mountains block one direction. The high desert blocks the other. So population growth funnels into the same narrow strip of land, pulling from the same rivers and draining into the same terminal basin. And Utah is still growing fast. The state's population is projected to increase by more than 2 million additional people by 2060. That water has to come from somewhere, but the geography offers no other somewhere. Even if the lake were simply shrinking, that would already be a major problem. But what the lake leaves behind as it retreats is what turns this into an emergency. When the lake retreats, it leaves something behind, not clean sand. Lakebed that has accumulated heavy metals and industrial waste over thousands of years, arsenic, mercury, lead, lithium, selenium, a century of mining operations, smelting facilities, and industrial runoff concentrated those materials in the sediment at the bottom of the lake. Now that sediment is drying out, and when the wind crosses it, the dust lifts into the air and blows directly toward the Wasatch Front, where more than 1 million people live. This is not theoretical anymore. In 2026, researchers at Utah State University published findings showing that dust from the exposed lakebed was being absorbed by plants, soils, and human bodies across the Salt Lake Valley. Leafy vegetables exposed to the dust contained elevated levels of arsenic and uranium, even after thorough washing. Some of those metals dissolve easily in stomach acid. And the concern is not exposure to one toxin in isolation. It's the cumulative effect of breathing and consuming small amounts of many of them over time. The Utah Department of Environmental Quality has been monitoring the situation closely. The problem is that there is no modern American comparison for this scenario. No major US city has dealt with a toxic dust source this large, this contaminated, and this close to so many people. And the lake is still shrinking. BYU researchers project that, at current rates of water loss, the Great Salt Lake could become functionally unsustainable within years. That would expose hundreds of additional square miles of contaminated lakebed directly upwind of metropolitan Salt Lake City. There is already a historical model for what happens next. In Central Asia, there was once an enormous inland lake on the border of Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, called the Aral Sea. It was the 4th largest lake in the world. 2 rivers fed it. Fishing towns depended on it. Entire regional economies formed around it. Then, in the 1960s, Soviet planners diverted those rivers to irrigate cotton fields. The lake began to collapse. By the 1980s, former fishing villages sat miles from the shoreline. By the early 2000s, entire sections of the lake were gone. What remained behind was toxic dust, contaminated by decades of agricultural runoff and industrial residue. Today, the surrounding region has some of the highest rates of lung disease and throat cancer in Central Asia. People there breathe the lakebed every day. The world watched that happen for 40 years on another continent. Utah has been watching it too. Utah has started moving. In 2023, the state created a dedicated office of the Great Salt Lake Commissioner, a centralized authority meant to coordinate conservation efforts and respond more aggressively to the crisis. Lawmakers also funded large-scale agricultural water optimization programs designed to help farmers reduce water use without collapsing crop yields. And in 2026, the state launched a new water leasing system. The idea is straightforward. Instead of using their full water allocation on crops, farmers can voluntarily redirect part of that water back into the lake in exchange for compensation. Importantly, they do not permanently lose their water rights by doing so. That last part matters because water rights in the American West are fiercely protected. Under prior appropriation doctrine, rights that are not used consistently can become vulnerable over time. Farmers have spent generations protecting those claims. The state is now trying to convince people to conserve water without making them fear they'll lose legal access to it later. That is an extremely difficult balance to strike. And the scale of the problem is enormous. The Great Salt Lake needs roughly 1 million additional acre-feet of water every year just to stop declining. Not to recover, just to stabilize. Current conservation programs are measured in the millions of dollars, and the political obstacles are just as large. The people holding many of the oldest and strongest water rights are also among the most organized and politically influential constituencies in Utah. They have operated legally within this system for generations. Trying to forcibly reallocate that water would trigger immediate political and legal conflict. So Utah has largely pursued voluntary solutions instead. But voluntary solutions require money, time, and widespread participation, and all three are limited. Then there's the irony tying the entire situation together. Utah's ski industry, one of the state's most important economic engines, depends partly on the lake itself. The Great Salt Lake enhances snowfall in the Wasatch Mountains through lake effect moisture, helping create the light, deep powder that made Utah famous for skiing in the first place. As the lake shrinks, that snowfall contribution weakens. The snow becomes less reliable. Which means the same upstream diversions helping sustain agriculture are also indirectly undermining the ski economy that helps fund the state's response to the crisis. Every part of the regional economy depends on the lake. And every part of the regional economy is also draining it. Return to those satellite images. The lake in 1985, the lake today. The city beside it is larger, richer, and growing faster than almost anywhere in America. The lake that made that growth possible is smaller, saltier, and more toxic than at any point in recorded history. Salt Lake City didn't make one catastrophic decision. It made thousands of ordinary ones. Each farmer drawing their legal water allocation. Each subdivision expanding farther across the valley floor. Each river diverted a little farther upstream. Individually, none of those decisions seemed large enough to threaten a lake the size of the Great Salt Lake. Together, they changed the entire basin. That is the geographic trap at the center of this story. The same mountains that concentrated Utah's population into a narrow corridor also concentrated all of its water demand into the same watershed. And for more than a century, the lake absorbed the consequences. Now it can't anymore. The question is no longer whether Utah understands the danger. It does. The question is whether a system built over 175 years can change fast enough to save the lake before the lakebed reaches the city itself. And this is not just a Utah story. Across the American West, cities, farms, and industries are all competing for water from the same overstressed systems. The geography changes, the mechanism doesn't. If you want to understand how the same water law is draining a very different system in Texas, and what happens when an aquifer begins to fail, the Texas water video covers that story. The world has a structure. Let's keep finding it.